Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Malloy, and this is lecture 17.3, corresponding to pages 383 to 386 of the textbook, The Two Koreas. All right, let's get started. Korea became two separate nations in 1945. Today, there is North Korea and South Korea. Today's video is a brief overview of these two nations. World War II ended in 1945 with the Japanese surrender in August following the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Although World War II was over, providing many Koreans relief at no longer being controlled by the Japanese, the Cold War between the US and Soviet Union soon resulted in another conflict, the Korean War. Following World War II, Soviet troops occupied and helped rebuild the northern portion of Korea. The southern portion of Korea was occupied and rebuilt by American forces. The North and South were divided along the 38th parallel. This was supposed to be a temporary situation until elections were held. However, the division along the 38th parallel became permanent. Korea became a surrogate or substitute place where we indirectly fought the Soviet Union. It became a place where there was a proxy war. The Soviets helped communists take over the northern portion of the country. The U.S. helped to install a democratically elected regime. The Korean War happened when the North, supported by the USSR and eventually China, invaded the South in 1950. The United Nations voted to send troops to prevent the North Koreans from taking over the entire Korean peninsula. The United Nations troops were led by Douglas MacArthur, an American World War II hero. Although there were 15 nations who sent troops, most who fought against the North Koreans were American and South Korean. The war raged until 1953, with the fighting and borders moving back and forth many times. The Chinese eventually got involved in the conflict as well. In 1953, an armistice was signed. An armistice is a peace agreement that ends fighting. Remember World War I? The fighting stopped on November 11, 1918. Europeans still call this day Armistice Day. The armistice resulted in the war ending the same way that it started, in Korea. Two separate nations on the Korean peninsula divided by the 38th parallel. Today, the border is heavily patrolled and is called the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. South and North Korea are very different places today. South Korea has a democracy today. However, following the Korean War, they had a series of authoritarian leaders. Yeah, see, it's not just North Korea that has an authoritarian regime. Both North and South Korea have a long history of totalitarian rule. Their first leader was Syngman Rhee, as well as a president, Park Chung-hee. Authoritarian leaders typically rule very harshly and exert quite a bit of control over their people's lives. They are sometimes referred to as dictators or totalitarian in nature. South Korea had such leaders until the 1980s. However, they enjoy a democracy today with a less authoritarian government. Since the 1950s, South Korea has made amazing economic progress. Today, it is one of four powerhouse Asian nations that are referred to as the Four Asian Tigers, and this refers to their quick industrialization process. The other three Asian tigers include Taiwan, Hong Kong, which we know is now part of China, and Singapore. South Korea has a free market economy today. Remember the "we make as much as we want"ville from my bead activity in class? Today, South Koreans enjoy one of the highest standards of living, in part because of their economy. They are dealing with many of the same issues as other highly modernized societies, however, such as pollution. South Korea was affected by the recession that hit Asia in the 1990s. Unemployment increased during that time. However, they have rebounded as of the early 2000s. Most South Koreans live in urban areas today. Like most families that live in modern cities, nuclear families are more common in South Korea than extended families. Many women work outside of the home, and family size remains small. North Korea has a very different way of life than South Korea, which I think has been made clear in the recent videos we have watched, as well as the presentation we just had in class from our in-house world traveler. We know that North Korea is a communist, totalitarian state. The first leader of North Korea was Kim Il-sung from 1948 to 1994. He is the eternal president, even today, and is called the Great Leader. Kim Il-sung helped establish a policy called Juche, which means self-reliance. It was based on the idea that North Koreans needed to learn to be independent and not reliant on other countries. They needed to be self-sufficient. Under Kim Il-sung, North Korea focused on heavy industry and imported very little from other nations. Kim Il-sung's son, Kim Jong-il, took over in 1994. He further industrialized the nation and he began more trade with other countries, primarily China and Russia. The standard of living in North Korea is considered lower than in South Korea, as it is far less industrialized. A massive famine hit the nation in 1995 due to weather-related flooding and the government's inability to provide enough food for its people. Because of the secretive nature of North Korea, the world was not fully aware of the extent of the famine. North Korea did not ask or want to ask for foreign assistance, and there are no known numbers for this famine today. However, some estimates have been as high as millions of deaths from starvation. Kim Jong-un is the new leader of North Korea as of 2012. There is recent evidence to suggest that there is a power struggle taking place in North Korea as Kim Jong-un tries to establish himself as the new leader and gain credibility. There is also evidence to suggest that Kim Jong-un has cracked down on the outside influences and expanded his totalitarian practices to maintain control. Credible sources indicate the existence of hundreds of thousands of political prisoners who live in prisons or work camps. There are reports of major human rights violations. The regime has made threats against its neighbor, South Korea, as well as threats against the U.S. and Japan. There are many people who feel that with the rising access to technology and the outside world, North Korea will have a difficult time maintaining a totalitarian state for much longer. Well, that's it. That's pretty much in a nutshell how North and South Korea became North and South Korea. Thanks for listening. Bye.